And our final principle is the principle of unity. You may have heard the expression that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. In a single design, it's possible to use each available element, like line, type, shape, texture. You can use them all independently, but the true power is going to lie in the skillful combination and coordination of these elements. In fact, multiple elements in a design will necessarily work either with each other, providing a unified whole, or against each other, leaving the design with a disjointed feeling. Even if individual elements are suitable independently, they might not be suitable together. Unity, which is the coordination of design elements so that each works well with others, it's going to play a fundamental role in any design that you're going to do. Layouts need unity. Readers need visual clues to tell them that a piece is a unit, that this copy and headline and photo and caption all go together. If there's an organization of or a relationship between elements on a page, you'll lose your readers. Like imagine a grocery store where the cleaning supplies were all mixed in with the produce. You wouldn't know where to find what you wanted, and you basically leave. Visual unity is one of the most important aspects of well-developed design, and it's planned by the designer. Unity provides the cohesive quality that makes each layout feel complete and finished. When all the elements in a work look as though they belong together, the designer has successfully achieved unity. So why is unity important? Well, establishing and maintaining consistency throughout the printed piece, it's essential to the success of your design. If there's no unity, then the main message of the design might be lost, or it might miss the target audience. So unity is going to help to hold the image together, both image-wise and message-wise. You can achieve unity with a grid. As you look at a successful design, you may not be aware of its underlying structure, but it's really important to the success of a design. In design, the structure is usually referred to as a grid. Books, magazines, brochures, newsletters, web pages, any multi-page document, they're rarely built without the help of a grid. A grid can provide unity in a variety of ways, through a consistent border, a set column width for type, the same space between columns, a consistent size of text type, a common position for page numbers, and a common opening layout for different sections. When a grid is functioning successfully, the reader gets the feeling that the design is all working together from page to page. The importance of this underlying structure in creating unity in a design can be discovered through the following example. If you look right here, a simple grid can basically provide consistency between pages of a design. So here, in this first example, the elements are placed into 4 different formats at random. There's no underlying grid structure. It might be kind of close, but there really isn't an underlying grid structure. Here in my second example, the elements are arranged in a more orderly way with the help of a visible grid. So you can see the grid that's being used here and how all these things line up, and I kind of left the original positions of the things like slightly grayed out so you can see how just moving them lines everything up. And then finally, when the grid is made invisible in the bottom row right here, and the top row shows the original layout, you can see that the layout on the bottom is more consistent with one another than those in the top row. It just looks a little more polished and everything kind of lines up correctly. So when do you need to use a grid? Well, grids can be used to establish unity, but they may cause the design to lose some of the spontaneity or visual intrigue. Grids, when they're followed tightly, they function to unify basic design, but sometimes it's at the expense of the designer's freedom of expression. So just be aware of that. It's okay to break the grid structure sometimes. You don't always have to follow it, precisely, but it definitely helps basic structure. Once the basic structure is in place, a creative designer can strategically break out of the grid to give the design vitality. But this has to be done with some thought, or it can be overdone and it can weaken the grid's usefulness. If you're a beginning designer, you may want to start by using a fairly tight grid, or one that strictly guides the placement for most of your elements on the page. This is going to help you to achieve the feeling of unity, and this is going to ensure a more professional look for your piece. After you gain some experience of using a tight grid, then you can begin to experiment with elements that purposely violate the grid, and this is where you'll achieve the most vitality in your designs. You want to think about leading the eye through different elements. A designer uses careful placement of design elements to lead the viewer's eye through a piece. A design that fails to do this is going to run the risk of disrupting the communication of the concept. The tools that are going to help you effectively lead the eye include the position of the elements, their relative size, subject matter, value, and color. So if we look at this example that's shown right here, you want to take into consideration the factors that interact to cause the viewer to see the elements first in one order and then in another. So the illustration used basically three elements. It uses a shape, headline type, and text. In the first example here, the elements are just kind of placed randomly on the format. The shape, by virtue of its size, commands the most attention, so this is where your eye enters the design that looks at the shape first. But this might not be what you want. For instance, if you're designing a poster and you need to have the reader notice the headline first, is it possible, like using these same elements on the format, to persuade the reader to read the larger type first? Well, sure it is. You can just move some stuff around. In this example, the headline is placed within the shape. So the shape tends to act as a frame, like a painting, and then the type is kind of takes second place, behind it, and it, almost is like it guides the eye to the type instead of like to the shape. You look at the type first and then you look at the shape. So just kind of consider that. And then finally, in our third example here, when you place the text, all the text inside the shape, it now becomes the last element that commands attention. So now we have successfully led the viewer, led the eye of the viewer, because they're not focusing on this blue background anymore. You're actually focusing on the text, and you have basically achieved unity. So sometimes you're going to want to lead the eye through similar elements. An important part of layout is knowing how to lead the eye through your design, even when the design consists of very similar elements. So take, for example, the possibility that you have 4 photographs that are different in content, but they have roughly the same mass. For the purpose of simplicity, we're going to represent these photographs by dots. So these shapes are placed in different positions to show how you can lead the eye. When you add subject matter to the photographs, then you increase the ability to control the eye. So let's examine how these various placements are going to lead to different readings of the same element. Your eye can be led to a particular order with the use of similar elements. So in the first example, one of these shapes, it's isolated from the other 3, and it causes the eye to go to this shape first. In this example right here, 3 of the 4 shapes fall within a grid, and then the 4th falls outside of it. So where does your eye go first? Kind of like the first example, your eye is going to go to the single element that's set apart, the one that's outside of the grid. And then in this shape right here, the dots are arranged in a line, and it causes your eye to kind of read them from left to right. So these examples are very simple, but they do hopefully demonstrate the basic ways that you may begin to lead the eye of the viewer, which is always required in constructing an effective design. The same concept also works with the elements of type, line, and texture. In fact, you have this much control over the attention of the reader with the use of similar elements. Imagine what you can do when you introduce elements of different sizes, of different colors, positions, of subject matter into your design. In the hands of a skilled designer, the principle of unity is a really significant asset. If you ignore the principle, a lack of unity and eye control, it can confuse the reader and kind of muddy the concept of your design. So experiment with things like this, with the subject matter of each photograph, with the intensity of the image, the contrast of each image in relation to the others, the color of the subject matter on each photograph. The possibilities are basically endless. You're going to discover a new power in your work as you gain skill in controlling the unity of your design. So now let's talk about unity versus contrast. There's often, like, the more same something is, the more monotony you experience. So unity is important, but not at the expense of contrast, which really provides interest. Achieving an appropriate balance between unity and contrast, it's tricky, and sometimes it can be a sensitive issue. On the one end of the scale, you have pure contrast, which might be defined as chaos, and then on the other hand, you have complete unity, which might be defined as sameness, almost to the point of boredom. So as you gain experience with design, you're going to find that there's a magical balance that allows you to design your designs to maintain interest without feeling unconnected or fractured. And that's kind of what you're always striving for. So these are some things that you might want to consider. Does the design you want to use, does it call for a grid? For most multi-page documents, a grid is probably necessary. Single-page documents may or may not benefit from a grid. How complex do you need a grid to be? What elements do you want to be consistently placed on the grid lines? Where might it benefit your design to break the grid? When you look at the pages where you've broken the grid, do they still seem connected to the pages where your grid is intact? If this is not the case, then consider whether you've been too free in breaking your grid. Have you been able to achieve unity through the use of similar elements? Do your lines and blocks of text and copy and other elements on the page look as if they belong together in the same way? Does the design lead the eye? Is there an obvious place in your design where the eye enters and then travels through the elements? And have you eliminated any elements that distract the eye and pull it away from the important parts of your design? You can create unity, or to create unity, you can repeat a color, a shape, a texture. You can put a texture in different areas of the spread throughout the layout. You could give all the photos the same treatment. You could make them all circular or oval. You could group elements such as related headlines, body copy, pictures, and captions. You could group those things together. You could pick visuals that share a similar color, a theme, or a shape. You could line up photos and copy along the same grid lines throughout a piece. You could stick to one or two type families, varying them only in size and weight for contrast throughout your brochure or newsletter. You could keep this type style that you selected for heads and body copy and photo captions and callouts consistent throughout the layout. You could keep the same color palette throughout. You could place callouts like quotes or sentences that summarize a piece, or pull quotes near the section of type from which they were taken or which they directly apply. You could use a border around a poster, a page, or a spread, and you could group elements with lines, screens, or tints. So how Unity works with the other principles is similarity. Repeating colors, shapes, values, textures, or lines, these help to create a visual relationship between the elements, and it's actually referred to as correspondence. Unity works with color symbolism. Colors that work together with a message, like an environmental action poster might do well with greens and other natural colors. The color supports the message. Unity can work with shapes and lines. Are they curved and soft in an organic sense, or are they hard and sharp at right angles for something to do with computers or something technical? You can use Unity with size. One element is not overwhelming another, to the point that is it overwhelming another element to the point that it's being lost? So consider that. You can also use Unity with fonts. Do the fonts work together in the design? Are you using curvy fonts with curvy lines? Are you using rigid lines with rigid fonts? Fonts can help convey and support the message, and they're very powerful, so think about how you can use fonts. How about working with Unity for the style, the overall style? Does it create a united message? Like a wedding invitation has a certain style and elements give it instant recognition. It might have wedding bells or doves or flowers or the bride and groom images, a real flowing script type font, an ad for a certain brand of wedding invitations. You might want to use the wedding elements in that design because they're going to help support it. Style also talks to the targeted audience. So the overall style of a hip-hop CD would be radically different from the design of a Gilbert and Sullivan CD. Each design is going to be tailored to the market, and the product's respective tastes are kind of, they're already established from the market. You can also consider how Unity works with proximity. This is the simplest method of making objects appear like they belong together in a group, is to group them closely together, and this allows you to kind of see some sort of pattern. And what about Unity working with repetition? It's another method that's often used to promote unity is the use of repetition. Repetition of color, of shape, of texture, or the object itself can be used to tie work together. And then finally, continuation. A much more subtle method of unifying work involves the continuation of a line, an edge, the direction from one area to another. Continuation is often used in books and magazines to tie the elements of a page together with the use of rules. You might line up all the edges of the copy, the headlines, or the graphics. So consider things like that when you're trying to use Unity in your design. Let's go ahead and take a couple looks at some examples right here. The first example is this St. Ives cleanser, and it uses Unity by repeating elements directly from the label. It has a real clean look, the olives and the leaves, and lots of white space, and the colors are all very harmonious, and there's no really additional information is needed. The label just kind of says it all, but definitely the background image helps to unify this design. The next example is kind of interesting. It's this Queen Elizabeth book, and it's really beautifully constructed. It has lots of details that add to the elegance. And Unity is achieved by making a product that looks and feels rich, elegant. It embodies the feeling of decadence. The photograph is really big and beautiful. It has these die-cut foil insets that separate some of the pages, and then the red and gold really complement each other, and they make for a bold and very rich statement. Every detail, including these little embellishments that kind of appear on every page, they really create a cohesive, unified look throughout the whole thing. The next example is this Regina Bernstein healing brochure, and it's unified with the color scheme that it uses. The palette is pleasing, it's very complementary, it works well together, it's very soothing and nurturing, and it helps to display the content of the brochure well. The images are they all the same kind of style for this composition? The colored shapes that are repeated throughout the brochure, the orange blocks of shape, and within them there's kind of like a subtle like little swoosh line that is used, and it helps to provide texture for the piece. This orange bar that appears along the top of the piece on several pages and on the bottom in other pages also helps to kind of frame the piece and unify it. And the last example is this Times eucalyptus line of body products. It has really beautiful packaging and labels. Unity is used in each individual label and then on the packaging and the product line. The use of type, line, color, shape, it's all unified, and the layout really works well. It's well spaced out. It's very, comfortable to look at it. You can see many uses of the design principle of Unity being used here, and they all work together, and the result is a very cohesive product line. So that's the lecture on Unity, and hopefully you'll become more aware of this and start to use it in your designs as well.